Statement 3 of chapter 3. People claim that the disciplined conduct of the training in rejecting and practicing is the dharma of the Shravakas. Here, Kyoba Rinpoche says, all of the precious disciplined conduct is the gnosis of omniscience. In other words, whereas, there are people who say accepting and rejecting, that's the common phrase used, is something that is only on the level of beginners. Shravakas, that's what it's supposed to communicate. Yeah? It's only for those beginners. They have to accept and reject. And so the Vinaya Pratimoksha is all about, what to accept and what to reject. Then you find, of course, in the many of the songs of the Mahasiddhas, expressions like beyond accepting and rejecting. So on that basis, a lot of people think, oh, accepting and rejecting is just something you have to do, when you are on a very basic level. Here, Kyoba Rinpoche says, actually, what is shown, what disciplined conduct, what the Buddha gave in terms of what we should practice, meaning accept, and what we should reject. And so what the Buddha prescribed and what the Buddha proscribed, those are what the wisdom, the all-knowing wisdom, the gnosis of omniscience, Sobish's translation. Normally we translate as this all-knowing wisdom is the basis for what is given in the precious disciplined conduct. Yeah, so let's look at the commentary. The Vinaya is the domain of omniscience alone. And if even the mighty 10th-stage bodhisattvas are unable to establish the basic training of the Vinaya Dharma, need I even mention the lesser bodhisattvas, Partheka Buddhas, and Shravakas? So here, Chodra says, even 10th stage bodhisattvas, Buddhas are the 11th stage, even 10th stage bodhisattvas cannot really lay out all the intricacies which the Buddha laid out in the Vinaya. So how much more, to say that the Vinaya is meant for Shravakas is an incorrect view. The Buddha quality of knowing reality as it is the realization of the reality of samsara and nirvana. Furthermore, the knowledge, quote, of its various cases. So these are the two knowledges, knowing things as they are, meaning the emptiness aspect, and knowing things in its various cases. So it goes back to our first chapter, first statement, right? The way things are and the way they play out, the way they descend, the way they come down. So the second one, the way they descend, the way they come down, the way they manifest. Furthermore, the knowledge of its various cases is the knowledge wherein all dependent origination of cause and result are known individually and unmistakenly. So these two knowledges is what makes a Buddha a Buddha. Completely realizing the emptiness nature of all phenomena, as well as realizing, understanding completely interdependent origination or dependent origination. Understanding emptiness, understanding dependent origination. Which is, in Kyoba Rinpoche's biography, you'll see that, after Pamodrupa passed away, he continued to develop and continue to purify his obscurations until it is said, when he completely understood how dependent origination, cause and effect, arises within the reality that is empty. So that those two now are, no longer contradicting. In his biography, it also points out, like at an earlier point when he thought he understood this point, this is when Pamodrupa was still alive. He thought he understood, oh yes, emptiness and dependent arising are two sides of the same coin. He gained some understanding, but then he mistakenly thought, yeah, this is it, I got it. But before long, he realized, no, that's just a very preliminary understanding. The full understanding is not there yet. So he continued to practice. He continued to meditate. He continued to purify. And so it did not happen until Pamodrupa passed away, when he went into intensive retreat for like 7 years, then a break. Within the 7 years, there was a couple of breaks, I think. Then after the 7 years, a period of maybe a few months or maybe even up to a year, I think, that he was out of retreat. And then he went back into 4 years. And at that 4-year point, it said that when he finally achieved the full understanding of dependent origination and emptiness. And this is also a key point, a key emphasis in the experience of Je Rinpoche Tsongkhapa. If you read Je Rinpoche Tsongkhapa's biography, it also talks about how he struggled with the understanding of this central issue of how emptiness and dependent arising are two sides of the same coin. In many ways, I think Je Rinpoche, that came a few centuries later, in many ways, his struggle kind of resembled the same struggle that Jigten Sumgon had with understanding the relationship between these two. I'm biased, I'm sure, but I think the influence of Kyoba Rinpoche's tradition on Tsongkhapa is underappreciated. People have not looked into it more seriously. Because I think in some ways they have been distracted by Je Rinpoche's more explicit writings about emptiness. And that is, following from his Sakyapa training. But that's only one aspect of Je Rinpoche's activities, If you look at Je Rinpoche and Tsongkhapa's activities, like his whole picture, he was in retreat a lot. And when he was in retreat, what was he working through? He was working through this relationship between emptiness and dependent arising. So the text that we are looking at now in the other series, the 5 verses on emptiness, in fact, it's not just on emptiness, it is precisely on this issue of the relationship between emptiness and dependent arising. Again, many Western scholars, picking up from what mostly Tibetan scholars have done, they talked about how Jeren Rinpoche emphasized so much the importance of not falling into the trap of nihilism and needing to respect, have a healthy respect for relative truth. That is said to be like one of the main things that Jeren Rinpoche emphasized. And I remember, when I first read about this, I thought, oh yeah, and then these modern scholars, make it sound like, it is something that Jeren Rinpoche in the 15th century, kind of something unique, about him. But actually, Gyalpa Rinpoche already in the 12th century was very insistent on this point. And now, like if you look at the biography of Jeren Rinpoche Tsongkhapa, he, when he came from Eastern Tibet and started his formal training, he started with the Drigung. And I think those seeds are planted there. This notion of how dependent arising and emptiness are two sides of the same coin. Of course, Nagarjuna already emphasized this. Again, so it's not like unique to Gyalpa Rinpoche. But what I'm saying is that, there is a good evidence of, like where Jeren Rinpoche might have been influenced. Like right at the beginning of his training, I think this notion was already introduced to him. Then the rest of his training was in a way to truly and thoroughly understand this point. So anyway, we come back here. Furthermore, so the Buddha quality of knowing reality as it is the realization of the reality of samsara and nirvana, which is emptiness. Furthermore, the knowledge of its various cases is the knowledge wherein all dependent origination and cause and result are known individually and unmistakably. Still, furthermore, the gnosis of knowing the 10 powers as they are is the power of knowing that the cankers are exhausted, meaning the afflictive emotions are exhausted. The remaining 9 powers comprise the power that is the knowledge of the various cases. And so this is talking about, Buddhas are said to have 10 powers. The first power is the power of as they are. And so that is the one that, on emptiness, that destroys all afflictive emotions. Then the other 9 powers is related to knowing the way things then play out, the way karma plays out, both positively, negatively, how they play out, knowing all of that. Therefore, in that way, through the 10 or the 9 powers, the way to train in that which is to be stopped and that which is to be accomplished is taught. And by guarding the disciplined conduct, the 10 powers are finally possessed, obtained. As it is said, if you abide in disciplined conduct, the samadhis are obtained. If you abide in samadhi, discriminative knowledge is very effectively practiced. Through discriminative knowledge, perfect gnosis is obtained. If the gnosis is pure, the disciplined conduct is perfect. Here it shows, how the 3 trainings mutually reinforce each other, which is an earlier point already made, right? Where it says, normally people say, take these 3 trainings as in a linear way. First, you start with disciplined conduct. Then you have samadhi, power of samadhi established. Then, right, prajna or wisdom arises. So earlier in one statement, Gyalpa Rinpoche says, it's not always like this. Sometimes you start with the wisdom. Then because of, the glimpses that you have within the context of wisdom, then your mind settles. Right? And then when your mind settles, right, then you will act accordingly. You'll act accordingly. The disciplined conduct. So here, this quote, from one of the sutras, Kashyapa Parivarta Sutra, the sutra asked by Kashyapa. It shows how these three actually work in, I would say, like they're not like 3 steps, but you should think of it as the 3 legs of a tripod. For the tripod to stand stably, you need 3. So the common way is to say, when you abide in disciplined conduct, the samadhi is obtained, is stabilized, meditative concentration. And when that is stable, then concise, clear view becomes easy. At the same time, when clear view becomes easy, then perfect understanding arises. And when that perfect understanding is there, then the conduct now becomes completely perfect. So perfect conduct is the sign of a Buddha. We have to begin by training in disciplined conduct where it's not perfect yet. But when Buddha wisdom is realized, how does that wisdom play out? It plays out in perfect disciplined conduct. So Buddhas never get involved in the 10 non-virtues. Considering that meaning, the great translators too have taken the phrase, I pay homage to the omniscient one. So this is a tradition established by one of the Tibetan kings. I think it's Rinpoche, that made it like a standard. That when sutras of the 3 baskets, right? The sutra basket, the Vinaya basket, and the Abhidharma basket. When sutras are translated, Tibetan translators should add, at the very beginning, a verse of homage. Meaning like, I pay homage to Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. That's usually how a translation of sutras start. Then translation of Vinaya texts, right? They all start with, as Chodrat here says, I pay homage to the all-knowing one, the omniscient one. So Chodrat says, why do you think that is the case? Because the Vinaya is really where the all-knowing mind of the Buddha is at work. If you want to see how the Buddha mind actually works, in this sense, how the Buddha mind plays out, look at the Vinaya. And Adriana, your question from last time. This is also why the tradition is also reluctant to say, okay, now straight away go look at the Vinaya, because we are so far, from that. And if we look at the Vinaya, we might get, we might get wrong understanding. That's one problem. Another problem is underestimating the significance of that. Yeah, and think, oh, this is just kind of silly, Same with the Jataka tales, Yeah. A lot of times I think, if you look at the kids' books, you think, oh, this is just for kids. But in fact, the Jataka tales, is how the Buddha's omniscience, all-knowing mind plays out. Moreover, at the time of our teacher Buddha Shakyamuni's passing into nirvana, he proclaimed to Ananda, after I have passed away, put your trust in the Pratimoksha, which is the teacher. So Ananda actually asked the Buddha, who should be our teacher? Now that you are about to leave us, please appoint someone. But the Buddha says, no, the Pratimoksha should be your teacher. In other versions of this, it says the Vinaya Dharma should be your guide. And there Vinaya Dharma means, Vinaya would mean the practical application, Dharma would mean like the theory. So the theory and practice combined, that is sufficient to be your teacher. So the Pratimoksha Sutra says, saying, quote, after my passing into nirvana, this will be your teacher, unquote. The self-arisen one has openly praised Pratimoksha with great respect in the presence of the assembled assiduous monks. Since it was variously taught like this, this is well established. Sobish, in his notes, the basis for maintaining that only the omniscient Buddha is able to establish the basic training of the Vinaya is Jigten Sungan's teaching that all rules of discipline conduct pronounced by the Buddha are in total agreement with the fundamental nature. The Shi, right? Statement 1, chapter 1. Chokun Shisam Babki Neluk Den. Chokun, all dharmas. Shisam Bab, Shi, fundamental nature. All, Bab, the coming down, the playing out. So the Buddha taught these two. Moreover, to show that disciplined conduct is the sphere, is the domain of the gnosis, of all-knowing, omniscience alone, first, gnosis is explained. For this purpose, gnosis is differentiated into, gnosis is prajna, okay? Prajna is differentiated into two forms. Generally, the knowledge of how things are is the realization of the ultimate nature of samsara and nirvana. Two, the knowledge of its various cases is the knowledge wherein all the dependent originations of cause and result in that state are individually and unmistakably known. Choki Drakpa speaks about the first gnosis of, quote, the quality of the Buddha of knowing reality as it is, which is the realization of the reality of samsara and nirvana. He moreover explains this gnosis as the power of knowing that the cankers are exhausted. The afflictive emotions are exhausted. This, in fact, is the 10th of the 10 powers of a Tathagata. As Dorje Sherab and Rinchen Changchuk points out, this exhaustion of the cankers or defilements is not exhaustion of having abandoned or discarded them, but the realization that they have never existed. On a preliminary level, we say, right, the defilements are abandoned or discarded. But the early commentaries remind us that actually, even though it might be helpful for us to think about the need to abandon, right, or to discard the afflictive emotions, the cankers, right? But really the meaning is to realize that they never existed. Just like all things never existed in any way that you can call it a thing. In other words, it's also saying that they dependently arose. And therefore, it's like saying, so the examples, due to the cataract of the eye, you see spots appearing in space, and sometimes poetically called flowers turning up, hanging around, flowers floating around in space. Then when your eye cataract is removed, those flowers disappear, right? But it's not, in fact, what the eye surgeon did is not to remove flowers from the space, is to remove that error. So from that perspective, you cannot say, oh, that flower that was there, now it disappeared. It was never there in the first place. The second gnosis of omniscience, the knowledge of the various cases where all the dependent originations of cause and result in the state of realization are individually and unmistakably known, comprises the remaining 9 powers of the Tathagata. And so then the list of all these 9, but these 9 relates to the way things play out and the kind of wisdom that is required to understand how things play out. Yeah. So in that sense, right, these 9 is part of the Buddha's ability to benefit others. The 10th one, the one that sees the emptiness, that then destroys all the cankers, that then destroys all the defilements, that one, you can say, it pertains more directly to an individual's own freedom from confusion. But in the end, all 10, right, are part of what a Buddha is. This is also a way to show that, in fact, 9 out of the 10 pertains to how things play out. And given how things play out is how beings experience either happiness or suffering, then how things play out is more important than the emptiness side. In a way, you can say that. But of course, there's no way to have clear understanding of how things play out without perfecting the realization of emptiness. You get it? I'm excited, talking about this. I don't know if you are. I don't know. So if you look at these 9 powers, right? The power of knowledge of what is and what is not possible or appropriate. The power of knowledge of the ripening of karma. The power of knowledge of the various dispositions of beings. The power of knowledge of the supreme and lesser powers. The power of knowledge of the various inclinations of beings. The power of knowledge of the ability to purify afflictedness. The power of knowledge of death, transference, and birth, being able to see which being is dying where, going through what transition, and being born where. The power of the clairvoyant knowledge of former birthplaces of oneself and others. The power of knowledge of the paths leading to all places, that is leading to the various points of awakening. So all of this is about given how things play out, how can Buddha devise, give, prescribe all the necessary things that beings require in order to be free from suffering? And therefore, the Vinaya prescriptions, how can we treat those as preliminary? as only for those Shravakas who have to think about what to give up and what to practice. Whereas we are so advanced, we are so great, so Mahayana, until, we don't need these things. Sometimes people think like that. I would say, like no Buddhist or no Tibetan Buddhist of any tradition will say explicitly, oh, no, right? We don't need Vinaya. But if you pay attention, indirectly, sometimes this is said. It's the more subtle ways in which the emphasis on the importance of pratimoksha is kind of done away with. Not directly. Directly, no Lama will say, oh, you don't need the Vinaya. No, they won't say that. But in the more subtle way, whether they realize it or not, often I find that they undermine the importance of the pratimoksha. As Dorje Sherab states, the gnosis of knowing things, how things are, is the 10th power mentioned above, namely the knowledge of the exhaustion of cankers. And the remaining 9 powers listed above are the gnosis of the knowledge of the various cases. The 10th power is a resultant knowledge, namely the realization that the cankers have never existed, and in that sense, it is a knowledge of how things really are, namely, ultimately free from defilement. As we will see below, this knowledge is brought about by the practice of disciplined conduct that eliminates evil and accomplishes virtue. So how do we get to the 10th knowledge? That knowledge that destroys all defilements? By the practice of disciplined conduct. So disciplined conduct, Shila, is the result of the Buddha's omniscient mind, as well as the cause of the Buddha's omniscient mind. Yeah? The cause, as in, it is by practicing disciplined conduct. Dorje Sherab continues. This is a long quote from that commentary. Among these 10 powers, the 9 powers of the gnosis of knowing the various cases are combined through the training of eliminating and accomplishing, namely by disciplined conduct. Therefore, the vital points of the 9 powers engage in the wheel of the precious disciplined conduct. Again, the vital point of the first of these 9 powers engage in the power of knowing karma and karmic ripening. Through the pure eye that perceives gnosis, the Buddha perceives and considers the trainee beings. Since sentient beings do not recognize the cause, action, and result of wandering in samsara and virtue and evil, he establishes the training of eliminating and accomplishing, saying, this one has to abandon, this one has to practice. By practicing these instructions as they are taught, as means of abandoning defects and establishing qualities, the defects are removed, the qualities are completed, and the 10 powers of omniscient gnosis are actualized, as stated in the quote. Thus, if the precious disciplined conduct is completely pure, the 10 powers of omniscient gnosis are obtained, and through that gnosis, all the causes, paths, and results of samsara and nirvana are mastered without any confusion. Therefore, the Buddha proclaims as what one has to abandon, suffering, all the causes, paths, and results of samsara is what one must abandon. And he proclaims as what one has to accomplish, namely nirvana, all the causes, past, and results of the three awakenings is what one must accomplish. In other words, I pause here, the Four Noble Truths. The first two noble truths is what needs to be abandoned. The second two noble truths is what needs to be accomplished. So it's all about knowing what to abandon and what to accomplish. This is where one brings the 10 powers of omniscient gnosis to completion, since its domain is ultimately nothing but omniscience. Having such a meaning in mind, the Bodhisattva translators and Panditas express it at the beginning of their translations of the Vinaya text with the words, I pay homage to the omniscient one, intending thereby that the Vinaya is what this omniscience is all about. So he says, it's no coincidence that the early translators of these texts into Tibetan already recognized this point. And therefore, all the Vinaya texts will begin with, I pay homage to the all-knowing one. So as I said, in the Gelugpa especially, curriculum, the Vinaya and the Jataka tales are only carefully studied and taught at the end of your education, where you have already mastered all these so-called sophisticated things, the very precise and very detailed studyings of the different tenet systems, the refuting, the slicing, and then the hair splitting. In this tradition, hair splitting is not a bad thing. It's about how precise, how concise and how precise your understanding is. So when you say split hair, they say, good, how many parts can we split the hair? 64, 128? Because this is good, so you train all of that first before you are exposed to the details that are revealed in the Vinaya, which includes the Jataka tales. There's a collection of Jataka tales that have been translated in the 84,000 website. I mean, do not be afraid to go look at it, So Adriana, you asked that question. Not the Vinaya texts have not been translated from the Tibetan canon so much, but if you want to read a little bit about these related to this same body of texts, they have translated in 84,000 this text that talks about, I shared this text before, in all the 100 stories, So this is about the previous life of the Buddha. And so then, of course, it's taught by the Buddha when he was already Buddha. Then he's pointing out, here is how the interdependent nature of what happened and what resulted. What happened, then what resulted. So seemingly like insignificant or accidental actions taken in one scenario unfolds and leads to all kinds of consequences. That's why it is said, for us ordinary beings, we look at that and we say, no, really? Because we don't see. We're not able to see how seemingly insignificant or significant things can lead to great good or great evil. But if we look at what these Jataka tales tell us, what these Vinaya texts tells us, and if we know how to look, then we will benefit, we will be protected. Thus, on the one hand, the 10 powers, oh wait, continue there, right? This is where one brings the 10 powers of omniscient gnosis to completion. Oh, no, we finished that quote. Thus, on the one hand, the 10 powers and the 2 types of omniscient knowledge are cultivated through the disciplined conduct of abandoning evil and accomplishing virtue. And on the other hand, the rules of this disciplined conduct, the Vinaya Pratimoksha, can only be formulated by someone who has already obtained omniscient knowledge. This point refers to the difference between a Buddha like Shakyamuni, who discovered the disciplined conduct that leads to omniscience without having an omniscient teacher in this life, and the later fully awakened masters who can rely on the path of the Vinaya as proclaimed by the omniscient Buddha. Such is the importance of the Vinaya Pratimoksha that the Buddha proclaims in the Pratimoksha Sutra, that it will serve as the teacher after his death. Questions, comments? Any observations? Any?
I would like to ask something about the Samaya, the text, the Samaya that we read. Samaya is the presence of the mind?
Is Samaya what?
The presence of the mind?
Not in the context. Okay, you're talking about the first text, the short text we looked at. There, the Samaya is to, literally Samaya means commitment. So what is the commitment? The commitment is to training this mind. And it says there, you know, this mind where all defilements are purified and all qualities are actualized. What is the Samaya? The Samaya is to do that. To discard, to destroy all the cankers, all the defilements, and to magnify, to expand all the qualities, which is the subject of today's statement.
Okay, thank you.
I did not consciously choose that single Samaya text. This is auspicious interdependence. Really, I did not choose. At the end of the Samadhi empowerment, I looked at all the available translations and I looked at the time and I said, we don't have much time today to talk about a long text. Let me look for a short one. And that was the shortest one that I found, and click. So again, from our perspective, right? I just confess to you, I did not, plan this. I didn't spend the whole of last night looking at all the possibilities, looking at the statement. So I did not, right? So that I can tell you. But then if we think, oh, this is coincidence, then, from what we learned today, it will say, no, this is not coincidence. There is some tendril, there is some independent origination that happened at some point that all led to this coming together like this. And only a Buddha can see what the auspicious interdependence the auspicious dependent origination involved is. Then His Holiness said, Kyoba Rinpoche said, when things happen in this way, this is true meaning of Siddhi. So our common Siddhi that we experience, the accomplishment that we experience, this group, that this, according to His Holiness, Kyoba Rinpoche said, it is true Siddhi when things occur this way. That means without any overt forcing of situation. That is the true meaning of Siddhi. So you should rejoice, Like, it's amazing, like I said, like for so many months, basically on a regular basis, 20 to 25 of us. I know we all have responsibilities beyond this. We are at different stages of our life. Some of us have more freedom, some have less, but nonetheless, in this intricate mix of time zones, time in our lives, time in our respective countries, right? And all of our circumstances, and yet, we've been able to do this 3 times a week, 6 hours that we spend on this material. This is, some kind of dendra. Not just the ripening of previous dendra. Now we are creating dendra for future ripening. Tomorrow, day after tomorrow, next week, next month, next moment. All the auspicious dendra that comes into this. It's an amazing. For me, as I've said, there's really, up to this point, I mean, who knows about the future? Up to this point, I can tell you there's nothing more satisfying in terms of teaching the Dharma than to be able to, together with all of you, go over this. Because it's, the contents are just, to me, it's just so amazing. So rejoice in this, dedicate this merit to the freedom of suffering of all beings, to the attaining of Buddhahood for the sake of all beings. Other questions or comments? We have a few more minutes before.
Well, I would like to comment. How are you?
Oh, hi, baby. Grandma duty.
Yeah, it's keeping me busy. That's why sometimes I cannot come in, but I try.
Yeah.
In reference to what you were saying about the samayas and looking at your mind, when I first took the Kalachakra empowerment with you in Peru, I remember I kept asking His Holiness and you and everybody, what is the commitment? What is the commitment?
Yes.
How many mantras I have to do, how many times I have to. And I remember His Holiness telling me in a restaurant when I asked him, I dared to ask him, said, what are you talking about? I felt, what is he doing this to me? Why is he saying that? Do the mantras whenever you want. Do the sadhana whenever you feel like it. And then he said, talk to Honli, talk to him. He'll explain. And I was like, why is he doing this to me? I thought it was like crazy. And then remember you taught us at the Gompa what the commitment was to look at your mind, get rid of all your afflictions. And it took me a long, long time to really understand what he was saying and what you were saying.
Right.
I just wanted to, to explain my experience.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. So a little bit of background. Gloria and her husband, Jose, went to, they're in Puerto Rico, they went all the way to Peru, Lima, to receive the Kala Chakra from His Holiness. It's pretty amazing, this connection. Their background, sorry, I'm talking about you, but at least not in your back, right in front of you.
No, you're free to say
as
whatever.
far as I understand, their background, primarily training with Yangtze Rinpoche, and pretty known youngish Gelugpa Lama, who started the center where they are active at. And Yangtze Rinpoche basically told them, whatever opportunity you all can get to receive the Kala Chakra empowerment from a valid lineage holder, please do, because at this center we're going to focus on this. And so they turn up, with a number of their friends, all went down to Lima. Then most of them left that group, but both of them continued with us to the tour to Cusco. And so that's where we met. And so that's the background to this connection. And yeah, this is kind of the Drigong style, I would say, where, I mean, there's always exceptions. I'm sure you can find Drigong Lamas who say, do this, 100,000 this, 200,000 that, 300,000, they have their reasons. But the general Drigong style is really, everything comes back to, you look at the mind, you purify your negativities. That is your commitment. That is what we're committed to doing. And less emphasis on, being very technical about it, being very kind of like, you cannot do this, you have to do that, less as a style, but to always, say, you look at your mind, then you do what you need.
But actually, that's what Jansu Rinpoche is doing. Like weeks ago, he said, your commitment is to look at your mind and realize you have the Buddha nature. So never 100 that, he's on the same route,
Same wavelength, right. So then now we can see, the basis of this idea actually comes from, a strong emphasis that is, not just like His Holiness's kind of personal whim, this comes from an approach that is well, documented, in the formal teachings of the lineage, is to keep us coming back to, tame the mind. Then here the emphasis on, and this chapter that we're looking at, do not treat the do's and the don'ts as simply some preliminary thing, or some cultural thing, or some kind of like way to control you, I'm not saying that we have to accept, everything that the Vinaya Pratimoksha, if you look at the monks, and some of the things, I will be honest, some of the rules in there, I say, like, really, this is the Buddha's omniscience, but don't dismiss it. Don't dismiss it. Just so. Another kind of emphasis, right? Another way of putting it, which I've said in the past, it is not giving up your own thoughts, your own experience, because at the end, you have to trust and respect your own process. But at the same time, you do it with humility and with an attitude that there's so much more for me to discover and to learn from others. Trust your own process, remain humble to learning from others. When these two, these others can be gurus, lamas, with or without name, known or unknown, or just life itself. Continue to be humble. in knowing that we have so much to learn. But also, take responsibility and trust your own process, because it's your own mind, it's your own affliction that you have to purify. Okay, so dedication, bodhicitta. Changchu Semchu Rinpoche Ma Jie Ba Nam Ge Gyurche Ge Ba Nyam Pa Me Pa Yang Gong Ne Gong Du Bell Word Sure. See you on Friday. Last night's teaching will be uploaded into YouTube soon. And we had, I don't know, like 65 people on Zoom last night, and a number of other people on Facebook. So, of course, the first class, 65. Then next class, 25 will turn up. But that's our story. In any case, like the videos are available, and so you all have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please teach it.
Thank you.